Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, the Pretreatment 101 series, POTW Procedures for Conducting Compliance Inspections. This webcast is sponsored by EPA's Office of Water. I am Yixing Li with Tetra Tech. Crystal Beasley, our moderator noted on the webcast, is sick today, so I will be taking over that role. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll start by going over a few housekeeping items. The materials in the webcast have been reviewed by EPA staff for technical accuracy. The mention of any commercial enterprise product or publication does not mean that EPA endorses them. So I would like to welcome everyone again, and this is the second in a series of Pretreatment 101 webcasts to discuss the federally required implementation procedures of the pretreatment program as required by 40 CFR Part 403, as well as other National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit requirements. I would like to briefly summarize some of the features of this webcast system. If you have any technical difficulties, please call 1-800-833-2812 or click the Help button to receive technical support from ON24. If you are calling internationally, please call 1-415-829-5211. The event number for this webcast is 270-629. Please use this number when requesting assistance so ON24 staff will know which webcast you are watching. You may also use the Ask a Question area to post any technical issues you are experiencing. Please include a telephone number where you can be reached, and we will help you troubleshoot your problem. We will have several question and answer sessions during this webcast. To ask a question, please simply type your question in the text box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Then click on the Submit Question button. If you need to wait, you don't need to wait until the question and answer periods to submit your question. In fact, we encourage you to submit your questions early in the presentation. There will also be several occasions when we will ask you questions. These poll questions will appear in the slide window. Please submit your questions in the same slide window. Do not put your answers in the Ask a Question box. If you would like to see closed captioning, just click on the closed captioning button at the lower left-hand corner of your screen. The closed captioner will be on shortly. At the end of the webcast, you can ask a question. You will be asked to complete an evaluation survey. The survey will appear in the slide window. This webcast will be archived indefinitely so you can access it in a few weeks. The archived webcast will be posted within a few weeks on EPA's website at www.epa.gov/NPDES/training. We will let you know when it becomes accessible. One final note before we start. We will try to answer as many questions as possible throughout this webcast. Christine Wong of Tetra Tech will be reviewing all of the questions that you submit. She will try to queue up as many questions as possible. However, due to the number of participants, not all questions will be answered. But we will post the speaker's contact information just in case you would like to contact them after the webcast. Today, we have Jan Pickrell, who will briefly describe the Pretreatment 101 webcast series and the upcoming webcast. Ms. Pickrell is EPA's National Pretreatment Program Coordinator in the Water Permits Division of the Office of Wastewater Management, otherwise known as OWM. Jan?
Hello. This webcast is the second in a series of webcasts that will discuss the federally required implementation procedures of a pretreatment program found at 40 CFR Part 403 and the NPDES program, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. This webcast will discuss the regulatory background of the POTW's requirement to conduct compliance inspections at industrial facilities, required compliance inspection frequencies for the different types of industrial user classifications, procedures for conducting compliance inspections, inspector responsibilities and qualifications, and procedures for handling confidential information. First, to give you a brief overview of this webinar series. The General Pretreatment Regulations of 40 CFR Part 403 require POTWs to have certain legal authorities and procedures to implement a pretreatment program. This Pretreatment 101 series is designed as an introduction to assist publicly owned treatment works, or POTWs, in becoming aware of the major components of an approved pretreatment program so that they can develop a pretreatment program that is compliant and consistent with the federal requirements. The archived copy of today's webcast, once available, as well as other pretreatment webcasts, can be found on EPA's NPDES webpage under Trainings and Meetings. Today's webinar and the next webinar are focused on a broad category of compliance monitoring. Here you will see the website to register for the next webcast in the series, which will be next Tuesday, January 25th. Please register at this website so that you can be ready to view it. The section of the regulations that is identified on the slide contains the procedures that a POTW must develop and implement as part of a pretreatment program. Paragraph 5 of this section, 40 CFR 403.8 F2.5, speaks to the requirement for the POTW to have procedures for inspecting and monitoring the industrial users in order to independently assess the industrial user's compliance with the regulations, separate from reports submitted by the industrial user. Today's webinar will go into details regarding the POTW's requirements to inspect the industrial user. The next webinar, as said a few seconds ago, will discuss the POTW's requirement to sample and analyze the wastewater effluent from the industrial user. The ability to implement a successful pretreatment program depends on the existence of legal authority. The POTW must be able to respond to challenges presented by its industrial users in order to protect its capital investment in the treatment plant and the collection system, and to ensure the beneficial uses of its waters, and to protect the health and welfare of its citizens. POTWs, or more broadly, the municipality of the POTW, must have the legal abilities to conduct its activities. The Pretreatment 101 Legal Authority webcast will discuss the minimum federal requirements that a POTW must have and must be able to perform to implement its pretreatment program. One of the tasks that a POTW will perform as it implements its pretreatment program is to issue control mechanisms or permits to an industrial user. During the Legal Authority webcast, we will discuss the POTW's requirements to issue control mechanisms to its industrial users. The federal requirements also require the POTW to have and maintain sufficient resources and qualified personnel to carry out the authorities and procedures described in 40 CFR 403.8 F1 and 8F2. The Funding and Resources webcast will focus on needed resources and staff to implement an effective and efficient pretreatment program. Topics will include discussions of necessary equipment, funding, staffing the program, including organization of personnel, staff responsibilities, staff qualifications and staffing levels, and other implementation costs. The Local Limits webcast will provide a broad overview of the local limits evaluation and development process. Local limits are a required component of an approved pretreatment program, as specified in 40 CFR 403.8F4. The clause of the regulations identified, 40 CFR 403.5C, outlines when a POTW must develop and enforce specific limits. And what are local limits? Local limits are site-specific requirements and limits that a POTW adopts in order to implement and enforce the specific and general prohibitions listed at 40 CFR 403.5A and B that are applicable to all industrial users to the POTW. And identified last in this outline of required components of an approved POTW pretreatment program, but certainly not least, is the POTW's ability and procedures to conduct an enforcement program. 40 CFR 403.8F5 requires a POTW to develop and implement an enforcement response plan. This plan must contain detailed procedures indicating how a POTW will investigate and respond to instances of industrial user noncompliance.
Thank you, Jan, for that broad overview of our upcoming webcast. So as previously mentioned, we are in the second of a series of several webcasts, and the next one will be held on January 25th from 1 to 3 p.m., and the topic will be conducting compliance monitoring. So now we would like to poll the audience for their input on what topic should be next following the compliance monitoring webcast. On your screen right now, you will see 4 options. First option is legal authority and permitting. Second option is funding and resources. Third is local limits, and the fourth is enforcement. So audience members, please click on the topic that you would like to see presented after the compliance monitoring webcast. Now, while we wait for those results, I would like to remind everyone that if there are any technical difficulties, they should call 1-800-833-2812 or click on the help button to receive technical support from ON24. If you're calling internationally, please call 1-415-829-5211. The event number for this webcast is 270629. Please use these numbers when requesting assistance from ON24 so the staff will know which webcast you are watching. So let's see if we have the results of our poll. And, okay, great. So let me show everyone. It looks like everyone would like to see at 35% the local limits. 35% of the audience member would like to see local limits presented next. So after the January 25th webcast, you should be seeing some type of notice from EPA when the local limits webcast will be presented. Thank you, everyone. So now Ms. Pickerel will continue her presentation, and she will briefly discuss the regulatory background and the required frequencies of POTW compliance inspections. Jan, take it away.
Thank you, Yixing. As Yixing just announced, in this section I'm going to give an overview of the regulatory requirements for doing inspections, and then after my presentation, Jennifer Dodd will go into more detail regarding the actual responsibilities of inspectors and conducting the inspection. One of the required procedures that a POTW must develop and implement as part of its approved pretreatment program is to randomly sample and analyze the effluent and the industrial users and conduct surveillance and inspection activities of its industrial users. Specifically, the POTW's goal is to identify industrial user compliance with the federal, state, and local regulations independent of information supplied by the industrial user. The regulation at 40 CFR 403.8F25 states that significant industrial users must be sampled and inspected by the POTW Control Authority at least annually. The regulations also allow that a POTW might be able to conduct less frequent inspection and sampling activities for facilities that might be classified as middle-tier categorical industrial users and non-significant categorical industrial users. The POTW POTW achieves many goals in conducting on-site inspections and sampling. Because inspections and sampling activities are closely related, they are often performed concurrently. For the purpose of this webcast, we will only be discussing compliance inspection procedures and frequencies. Inspection activities should be designed to evaluate and confirm activities at the facility. Examples of things for which on-site observation are particularly valuable include items listed on this slide, such as evaluating status and compliance with construction or compliance schedules, identifying process changes, ensuring the basis of requirements imposed on the industrial user via the regulations and or control mechanism reflect on-site conditions, and determining if an action required in a previous enforcement proceeding has been performed. Additional activities for which on-site observations are paramount include industrial user implementation of best management practices, including checking to see if they are properly documenting those activities that they are required to do in their records, reviewing chemical storage areas, noting chemicals stored that might impact the POTW, as well as the proximity of the chemicals to floor drains, the integrity of the storage area, such as strength of the containment berms and size of containment area, to ensure that an accidental release would not result in a harmful slug loading to the treatment plant. Last but not least, the more opportunities that a POTW and industry personnel have to learn and appreciate their respective points of view, the better working relationship that can be fostered in order to share information. The regulations specify minimum inspection frequencies that a POTW pretreatment program must conduct in order to fulfill its federal obligations. EPA established these frequencies as absolute minimums to represent EPA's expectations for industrial users that have good compliance records. Please check with your state regulations and locally approved program requirements to see if more frequent inspections are required for your municipality and for certain categories of industrial users. The federal regulations require the POTW to inspect significant industrial users at least annually. The 2005 federal regulation revisions of the pretreatment regulations identified two additional classes of industrial users: middle-tier categorical industrial users and non-significant industrial users. I will discuss the inspection needs for these additional categories in the next couple of slides. In addition, even though there is no required minimum inspection frequency for other non-significant industrial users, POTW should establish inspection frequencies for any industrial users or commercial facilities that are locally regulated or permitted. For example, food service establishments under a fats, oil, and grease program. Both the classifications of middle-tier categorical industrial users and non-significant categorical industrial users have preconditions that must be satisfied before such classification and categorization may be granted. First and foremost, note that the phrase categorical industrial user is still in their classification. These facilities are still subject to the categorical industrial standards. Next, before a POTW pretreatment program may consider granting either of these two classifications, it must ensure that it has the legal authority to do so. In addition, the POTW pretreatment program must have adopted procedures to implement these categories. Please verify with your state approval authority or regional environmental protection agency office and your approved program documents to see if you have this authority. Next, conditions at the industries itself must be satisfied. An inspection would be an opportune event to verify that such requirements are met. On this side, you see the preconditions that a significant categorical industrial user might satisfy in order to be considered for the classification of middle-tier categorical industrial user. These facilities would still be considered to be significant industrial users and are still subject to all the requirements of a significant industrial user. In order to qualify for this MTCIU status, the industrial user's total categorical wastewater process flow must not exceed any of the following. It must be less than 0.1% of the design dry weather hydraulic capacity of the POTW, or 5,000 gallons per day, whichever is smaller. The categorical wastewater process flow must also be less than 0.01% of the design dry weather organic treatment capacity of the POTW, or any pollutant regulated by the applicable categorical standard must not exceed 0.01% of the maximum allowable headworks loading that was established and approved in the local limits for that pollutant for that POTW. Again, the industrial user's total categorical wastewater process flow must not exceed any one of those preconditions in order to qualify for MTCIU. Additional requirements is that user must not have been in significant noncompliance at any time in the past 2 years. And it must not have a variable enough daily flow rate, production level, or pollutant levels that any type of reduced sampling or inspecting of this facility might not provide information that is representative of the facility's operation or discharge. If the POTW determines that this type of user satisfies these requirements, the POTW must retain documentation of how this determination was made, as well as the industry must immediately report anything that changes at the facility that would change this determination. At that point, it would lose its MT or middle tier status and then assume all the requirements of the significant categorical industrial user status. So what is the benefit of this determination? As the table on the previous slide showed, the POTW might, after all of these conditions are met, decide that it might be able to inspect this industrial user facility every other year instead of the annual inspection requirement for these users. Okay, the next type of new categorical industrial user classification option that might be available is to consider a categorical industrial user to be a non-significant industrial categorical user. First and foremost, again, before a pretreatment program may consider granting this classification, it must ensure that it has the legal authority to do so. In addition, the POTW pretreatment program must have adopted procedures that outline that it knows how to implement this category. Again, please verify with your state approval authority or your regional pretreatment office with EPA and your approved program documents. Okay, just like with the other category, the non-significant categorical industrial user status has conditions that must be satisfied in order to grant the status. And an inspection would be an opportune event to verify that these requirements are met, as well as continue to be met throughout the years. In order to be considered a non-significant categorical industrial user, this slide identifies what those preconditions are that the industry must satisfy. The industry must never discharge more than 100 gallons per day of total categorical processed wastewater. The potential NSCIU must be consistently compliant with all applicable categorical pretreatment standards and requirement, and that industry must never discharge any untreated concentrated wastewater to the POTW. At the time that the POTW then might grant such status, this facility would then be required to submit a certification statement that is required in 40 CFR 403.12Q, together with any additional information necessary to support the ongoing the ongoing certification and qualification to comply with that status. As you probably recall that previous slide again with the table that identified the minimum inspection frequencies, there are reasons to actually increase the inspections more frequent than the absolute federal minimums. This slide identifies some of those categories, such as if the industry has a history of noncompliance or sporadic compliance, if complaints have been received from the public, or if you have noticed deterioration of the collection system, as well as just variable processes and changes in the system. Our next speaker will be discussing these in more depth. The next couple of slides will outline 4 general types of inspections. When first reviewing all of the users of a POTW system, when the POTW is trying to set up its pretreatment program, it often conducts a survey of all of its industrial users to try and identify those types of industries that are contributing pollutants in their discharge. This survey was the topic of our first webcast in our Pretreatment 101 series, and it is available for review and study. Typically also, besides just periodically reviewing industries, if you get a new industry to town, doing an inspection to familiarize yourself with that industry and to make that personal contact is another action that is taken as part of the initial inspection. It helps the inspector to familiarize itself with the process, with the facility design, and what pollutants might be discharged into the system. We also have what we call a routine compliance inspection, and this is that which is generally used to satisfy the federal requirements to do that annual inspection of that significant industrial user. These can be announced or they may be unannounced. There are some benefits to doing announced or scheduled inspections, such as making sure that a facility representative is on site to explain the general type of process that is being conducted and to find areas and answer your questions to any things that you have as outstanding issues. It also helps you build a cooperative relationship with that industry. If you, however, though, just, I'll say, pop out there as an unscheduled inspection or as a scheduled inspection, you may not necessarily be observing the facility during normal conditions. One thing that you can also probably do when you are scheduling inspections, you may be noticing that different industrial processes are run on certain days of the week, and then you can figure out when you need to come out in order to make a thorough inspection. On-demand inspections are the next type of inspection that I will discuss, and these are often more performed because of a suspected violation or a spill or discharge, some sort of public complaint, and usually is conducted as part of an emergency situation or evaluation that came about due to unexpected circumstances. On-demand inspections may be initiated with or without confirming, or may be conducted in order to confirm that a situation has or has not occurred.
Well, thank you so much, Jan, for the regulatory requirements of POTW compliance inspections. But before we start our first question and answer session, let's take a moment to ask another poll question. So, audience, which of the following best describes your agency? Are you a POTW or municipality, state regulatory office, federal regulatory office, environmental organization, an industry, or other? Please submit your answers now. While we're waiting for the answers of our poll question, I'd like to remind everyone that closed captioning is now working. If you would like closed captioning during this webcast, please press the button F5 to refresh your window. Closed captioning should be working now. Okay, so let's see if we have our poll results. Oh, no, well, before that, let's ask another poll question. This question is just for our POTWs. Our POTWs out there, how often are you conducting compliance inspections? Are you never conducting any SIU inspections? Are you doing the bare minimum of once a year? Maybe you're doing more at twice a year, quarterly, or varies, but at least once a year. Please answer your question now. Okay, so while we're waiting for the results, let's see if we have any questions. Christine, do we have any questions from our participants?
We have quite a few questions, actually. Let's start with a question for Jan. What is the federal requirement for inspecting non-significant CIUs once again? The Control Authority is required to evaluate at least once per year whether a non-significant categorical industrial user still meets the non-significant criteria that is set forth in the federal regulations in 403.3V2. This evaluation can include site inspections of the non-significant categorical industrial user, and furthermore, although facility might be considered a non-significant categorical industrial user, it is still a categorical industrial user. As such, the facility is still required to comply with all applicable pretreatment standards and requirements.
Great. Christine, do we have another question for Jan?
Sure. Here's a two-parter. Are there federal requirements for inspecting zero-discharging categorical facilities, and are zero-discharging categorical facilities NSCIUs? The Control Authority should always conduct an initial inspection and any subsequent follow-up inspections to evaluate a facility's claim of no regulated process wastewater discharge. The key is that the Control Authority needs to evaluate through that on-site inspection to determine if there is a reasonable potential for a discharge of any wastewater generated by the categorical industry process, and if there's a reasonable potential for adversely affecting the POTW's operation or for violating any pretreatment standard or requirement due to accidental spills, operational problems, and other causes. And so as a follow-up, are zero dischargers NSCIUs? Again, part of that determination is what is the potential that facility has. The NSCIU preconditions is that such facility cannot discharge more than 100 gallons per day. But certainly at that point, one, that number is an absolute, it's not an average. And so if the potential is there to be discharging more than that volume, such a facility would not qualify for that categorization.
Thank you, Jan. While we're waiting for more questions, let's go see what our poll results are from our two poll questions. So the first question was, which of the following best describes your agency? So currently we have almost 70% of you are POTWs and municipalities. Great. And then we have some others. I wonder what others mean, but I'm sure we'll get the answer later to that later. And our next poll question was, how often are you inspecting? So overall, it looks like 45% of you are just doing the bare minimum at once per year, and 30% of you are doing, varies, maybe once, maybe twice, depending on the situation. Great. Christine, do we have a couple more questions for Jan?
Sure. Here is one that a few people are asking. Are there any compliance inspection requirements for non-SIUs? The regulation requires regulation requires that industrial users, in general, be randomly inspected to ensure that the facility is in compliance with all of the specific and general prohibitions. In addition, the control authority should conduct random inspections to ensure that changes have not occurred at the facility at the last time that the facility submitted any information that established that non-significant status. The control authority would know best how often to conduct these, that although there are no minimum federal frequency requirements, that POTW would know how generally wastewater is flowing into the plant and through the collection system to know if other conditions warrant more frequent inspections.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Christine?
Okay, Jan, let's see. If I wanted to reclassify a CIU to an NSCIU, are there any compliance inspection requirements prior to this reclassification? So what are the other requirements that the CIU has to comply with?
Prior to reclassifying a categorical industrial user to a non-significant categorical industrial user, the POTW should have been conducting at least one compliance inspection per year at the categorical industrial user. Remember, the default definition of categorical industrial user is that it is a significant industrial user unless otherwise classified. In addition, prior to such reclassification to an NSCIU, that industry must have been in consistent compliance with all applicable categorical pretreatment standards and requirements. Federal regulations do not specifically identify the period for which the CIU must have demonstrated full compliance, but EPA notes the regulations at 403.12.0 require that industrial users maintain records of all information from any monitoring activities for a minimum of 3 years. These records should be reviewed and considered to the extent that they reflect compliance with current conditions. At a minimum, certainly, EPA expects that no categorical industrial user found to have been in significant noncompliance at any time during the previous 2 years would be considered to have achieved consistent compliance.
Great. Thank you, Jan. And, hey, audience, great questions. Keep those coming in. All right, so next we have Jennifer Dodd. She is the State Pretreatment Coordinator for the state of Tennessee. She has a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Warren Wilson College and a master's degree in environmental science and engineering from Virginia Tech. Jennifer's joining us off-site today in Tennessee, and I hope she's not too snowed in and iced in. Jennifer, you ready?
Right here.
Okay, Jennifer, take it away.
All right, great. Okay, to get started, we need to talk about what is the main goal for an industrial user inspection. Each time you do an inspection, you should be focused on, number one, the environmental activities of that specific industry, and then number two, the compliance status of that industrial user with all of their applicable requirements. And to be able to figure that out, you have to be familiar with what those requirements are. It sounds simple enough, but in actuality and practice, it can be pretty complicated. So here are a few practices to keep in mind when you're doing an inspection. You've got to work within your legal authority. Don't cite the industry for what appears to be violations that are other regulations such as OSHA or air or solid waste. Even if you're really familiar with those rules, it's outside your scope of your authority, and if you're citing them for something, number one, it's outside of your legal authority, but number two, it could look like you're trying to find something on that industry. So you want to make sure that you're just looking at pretreatment regulations. Number two, when you are doing evidence collection, remember that any of the information that you're documenting in this inspection, it could be used as evidence one day. So document carefully. You want to document like it might be on the front page of the newspaper one day. Hopefully it never will be, but if you document that way, hopefully you'll be safe. Now, safety issues. When you're at an industry, you need to follow their safety rules. And if their safety requirements are hampering your ability to get into the facility in a timely fashion or to really inspect them fully, then you need to have a meeting with that industry and work out anything that's going to need to be done for you to get in there, both in a timely manner and to get their full access to the industry. So if that means you need to get a certain clearance status, or if the inspectors need to do annual safety training with that facility, then work those out so that you can get into the facility in a more timely manner. Professional ethics in your conduct. It is so important for inspectors to keep very professional behavior the entire time they're there. Even if the facility rep is being rude, you have to maintain professional behavior. You don't want to give that industry any evidence that you might be biased against them. You know that if you say something such as, I'm going to be back, and when I am, you're going to be sorry, then they're going to tell that to the mayor or to your board, anybody that's going to listen, and that's going to weaken your case if they really have violations. Quality assurance, that goes back to evidence collection also. Just make sure that you document any quality assurance activities that you're doing. And then the final thing, documentation of evaluations. We'll get into that in more detail at the end of the presentation when you're documenting your findings. Confidential information. If an industry asks that you keep some of the information confidential, they can claim things such as trade secrets or something that gives them some type of advantage over their competitors. They can claim that as confidential. Other things, especially effluent data, cannot be considered confidential. So if it's not considered confidential, it's open to the public. But if what they have is considered confidential, you need to take it seriously. There are repercussions if you let it get out. So make sure you are, number one, aware of what your legal authority says that you're going to do with confidential information. And then number two, that you are actually being very careful with what information you have that is considered confidential. If you don't have to take information from the industry that is confidential, then don't take it. But if it's necessary for you to be able to run your program, then again, just make sure you're very careful with it. Okay, pre-inspection activities. You've got to plan effectively to make sure that the best use of your time is that you make the best use of your time, and to ensure the overall success of the inspection. If you don't review the background information prior to the inspection, let me repeat that, prior to the inspection, you might not be as effective. You might ask for information that you've already got, or you might forget to follow up on information that you need, and you'll have to contact the industry later for that information. And not only does that make you less effective, and it can lengthen the amount of time that it takes, but it may decrease your credibility with the industry. So let's talk about what to review. Much of the information in the following slides can be found in the industry's application, in their permit, their most recent report, or in any correspondence from the industry. Prepping can vary depending on the size of your program. If you've got a really small program with only a couple of industries, then you might be at that industry multiple times a year over the last several years, and you feel very comfortable with how it's set up. Then it's still important to do these reviews and to look over this information, but you might not have to study it quite as closely as somebody from a much larger program. A larger program with hundreds of industries will definitely need to do very, very close review before they go to the industry to make sure they're not mixing it up with another industry they've been to. And then, of course, if in either case, a small or a large program, if it's a new industry, you need to do a very thorough review before you go. Now, note that there are a lot of slides about prepping for an inspection, so you can take that as a hint that prepping is a very important step in this process. The first thing, look at the previous inspection report. Obviously, you want to know what you told them last time, what your findings were, and then you can check up on whether or not they have made changes or responded to any findings that you had in the last inspection. You want to look at maps or schematics, specifically looking at where the manhole is in relation to the building or where the different pipes come out of the building. You need contact information, and if you're going at a different shift, if you're going in the evening shift or a weekend shift, you want to make sure you've got a contact person for that time frame. And then if there's any special entry requirements, you'll need to be aware of that. You need to look at the nature of the industry's processing operations and any of the wastewater characteristics. General layout of the facility, that varies a little bit from the maps and schematics. In this case, you're looking at inside the building, where is the warehouse versus where are the different production lines. Production levels, that's important to have if the industry is subject to categorical limits that are production-based. But it's also good, even if the industry is not a categorical industry, it's good to know what their flow levels are because often those are tied to production levels. It's good to know what the production levels are because that's tied to their flow levels quite often. And then, have there been any changes in that facility since the last inspection? Have they sent you any correspondence letting you know? Water use data here. Water use data can be indicative, in some cases, of increases or decreases in production. So if you know in advance of going to that industry that their water usage has gone up significantly, and you get to the industry and they tell you that their production has stayed the same, you can follow up with them while you're there. You can question and find out if this makes sense. So if you don't know the water use data before you go, then you won't know to ask those questions. Flood control plans. Do they have one? What's the most recent copy that you have? Is it 10 years old? Maybe they might have a newer one. So when you're on site, you can find out if you have the most recent copy of their flood control plan. And you can also watch to see if they appear to be following that flood control plan. Now remember, slugs are more than just spills. It's a discharge of something that you don't normally get. So it could be a spill, but it also could be something such as a dairy that has a bad batch of milk and they need to get rid of it, so they dump it down the drain. That's not an accidental spill, but it is a slug. So you want to look for those types of discharges. You need to be familiar with what raw materials are on site, where they might be stored, so that when you're on site, you can take a look and evaluate the potential for those raw materials to be going down the drain. Special permit conditions. You're looking for something like if there's a best management practice that's in the permit, or possibly it's a tiered permit, so that limits are different during different seasons. Be aware of that before you go. If they're on a compliance schedule, you need to see where they are progressing towards meeting those timelines. Is the timeline, or is there a date coming up soon by which they need to meet part of that compliance schedule? Just being aware of this will help you ask important questions while you're there. You also need to know what are the sources, what are the volumes and characteristics of the wastewater that they are discharging to you. Now this slide, you can review this information before you go, but I don't expect you to have it memorized while you're there on site. But it's good to have it on hand when you're doing an inspection. Even if you don't carry it into the industry with you and carry it around with you, it's really good to have that in the car so that you can access it. If a question comes up, let's say you have a multi-jurisdictional agreement and you're in an industry that's in a different jurisdiction, a question might come up about whose responsibility it is to do a particular task. If you have that multi-jurisdictional agreement in the car, most of us don't have those things memorized. You can pull it out of the car and be able to make a determination while you're there. It increases your standing with the industry when you're able to be responsive, and it is so much easier to do that when you're face-to-face. And yes, we are still talking about what to review before you go to an industry. A few more slides on this. Again, I said prepping is so important before you go. Any correspondence that the industry has sent, you want to see what's going on. If they sent you a letter and you get there and you are unaware of what they've actually sent to you, it does not boost your standings with the industries. Past violations and compliance schedules, self-monitoring data, past notices of violation, or really and truly any other enforcement actions that have been taken recently. Even if you feel that you know that industry's compliance history really well, it's a good idea to look over their compliance history before you go to that industry. And look for trends. They might have more violations than you realized, or you might notice when you're looking at the history, when it's all in one place, you might notice that a lot of the violations were happening on a Monday, or there were seasonal issues. So looking at those trends can be very helpful. Then you also want to look at the wastewater treatment plant or pretreatment equipment that they have on site. And that includes how they might bypass that equipment. So if you see something different or unusual while you're doing the inspection, you're better prepared to ask questions or to follow up. Okay, now we are on to entering the facility. And this is a picture of Alcatraz. And I have been told that I have heard that the only thing harder than getting out of Alcatraz is getting into Alcatraz. And sometimes when you're trying to get into an industry, it might feel like you're trying to get into Alcatraz. Shouldn't be that way, but I think a lot of us have had that experience of a difficult entry into an industry. Here, for a routine inspection, if you are going during normal business hours, and this might include weekends or nights, especially if the industry is open during those time frames, make sure you have contact information for each of those shifts. You really need to be inspecting different shifts. If an industry is open at 24/7, and a lot of the cleaning could be happening on third shift or on the weekends, and you need to know what the mode of operation is during these different time frames. But for a routine inspection, arrive during that business when the business is open, and you can schedule a time and a date for an inspection. This is good, especially for the first inspection, if it's a new one, if you are trying to get a good understanding of what's going on in that industry. Now, as Jan said before, unannounced inspections are also good. Once you've done announced inspections, and you've scheduled that time with them, you've made sure that the right person is there, an unannounced inspection will give you a good picture of what's going on when they don't know that you're coming. And using both of those is a good idea. Now, the following entry procedures that we're going to go over don't necessarily apply during an emergency. When you're there, go into the main gate or enter any way that the industry has requested that you come in. Locate your contact person and make sure they understand that you're going to enter the facility. Lots of facilities have a sign-in sheet that they want you to sign. Some of the sign-in sheets have a statement that say, I agree not to share any information that I get while I'm in this facility. That you do not need to be signing those types of sign-in sheets. My staff and we will normally tell an industry that our attorneys have advised us not to sign those types of sign-in sheets. You want to look at the top of the page. You want to look at the front of the log sheet. You want to look anywhere where there might be that statement. And in that case, if it's there and you don't need to sign it, then we also will offer a copy of our photo ID for the records of the company so that they'll have a record of who we are and that we entered their facility. Like I said before, if prompt entry becomes an issue, have a meeting with the industry and work out any details for prompt entry. If that means you need to get special clearance or safety training, then that needs to happen. If you are refused entry, make sure that you've presented your credentials and you've explained why you're there. Ask them to explain why you were being denied entry. And it might just be a misunderstanding, and it might be able to be cleared up and you can go in, but you need to make sure that they explain clearly to you why it is you're being denied. If they continue to refuse entry to you, then you need to leave. Record your observations, but also call your supervisor immediately. Let them know what's going on. The supervisor may need to get a warrant, or they might need to start some other kind of enforcement action. But you'll also, as I said before, need to document everything as soon as possible. Write down who was there, who you talked to, who denied your entry, who might have witnessed it, what was said on both parties. That way, if enforcement does have to go forward later on, you'll have a good documentation of what occurred when you were there. Whatever you do, stay professional. Make sure you don't give them any evidence, even if they're being rude. Okay, when consent to inspect is not necessary, you really need to talk to your city attorney or your emergency response people to determine what procedures apply during an emergency situation. So make sure you're aware of that before the emergency situation occurs. As far as the open fields and plain view situations go, you're allowed to observe and to photograph activities when you are not on the industry's property. And you can do that without getting their consent to inspect, as long as you're not on their property. So if while standing in the street, you can see something, or if you're on somebody else's property legally, you can see what they're doing, then that's okay. Okay, so perimeter inspection. You can do a perimeter inspection prior to entering a facility. The picture on this slide shows a stain that indicates the spill got off-site. And if you're, especially if you just don't trust an industry, it's a good idea to, when you first get there, just do a loop around the perimeter and get an idea of what their housekeeping looks like, or if you see, again, things like this, stains going off the site, any other types of problems like that. It's just a good thing to do. Again, if you've not gotten permission to come onto the facility, you want to make sure when you're doing this perimeter inspection that you're actually not on their property. Inspection forms are a great tool. You can use them to prompt yourself for different questions. It's not a substitute, though, for you actually conducting the inspection and for you to be observant and to ask important questions. You're not limited to just those questions on the form. You can ask whatever questions make sense for doing the inspection, but you need to make sure that you're just using that inspection form as a tool. However, it really is good to prompt you to remember things that you might have forgotten, just basic information. Some of that basic information you can fill out on the form before you go, and then just confirm it with the industry when you're there. Some of that might be things such as the name of the company, the site address, the mailing address might be different than the site address. There might be a corporate address, contact information, their SIC number, the shift, the number of employees, information like that you can put in advance and then just confirm if it's changed. Process information is another important thing to have on your form and to get information about. Make sure that you've got their production operating hours, cleanup periods, any seasonal variations or scheduled shutdowns. Have there been any facility changes that they forgot to tell you about, or are they anticipating any changes in the near future? Water usage, wastewater generated, you want to look into where they get their water. Is it from the city? Is it from a well? You might also, and that would be important. I know of an industry that got well water, but the city didn't realize it. And so the city thought the industry was using a lot less water until they put a flow meter on them and realized that the well water was a large amount of their flow. So you need to be aware of whether or not they're getting water from somewhere else. You also want to know whether the wastewater, where it is generated within the industry, and talk to the industry about what kind of pretreatment equipment they might have, especially if it's changed or if they're thinking about changing it. If they've got flow diagrams, ask them for a copy of it. That's a great thing to have. user you've had for more than a year now should have already been evaluated for a slug discharge control plan. And not only should they have been evaluated, but you should have documented that you did the evaluation. The slug discharge, we mentioned this before, but the definition is any discharge of a non-routine episodic nature, including but not limited to an accidental spill or non-customary batch discharge, which has reasonable potential to cause problems at the POTW. And evaluating the need for a slug discharge control plan is different than determining if they have one. A lot of folks seem to think that asking the industry if they have one or if they don't have one is enough for the evaluation, but you actually have to evaluate whether or not that industry, in your opinion as the control authority, if they have potential to slug you. If you determine that they do have that potential to slug you and they need to have a slug control plan, at the top of this slide, the reference there, 40 CFR Part 403.8 F26, that is where you can find more information about what needs to be in that slug control plan. There are a number of sources of discharge that an industry can be sending to, and this is a list, a pretty good start. Not going to be all-inclusive, but it is a good place to start with each of your industries, asking if they have any of these operations and if they discharge from them. Some of these operations might sound a little strange to be worried about, such as restrooms or showers, but in some cases, the industry might be pouring something down the drain in a restroom, or contamination on the employees might make its way into the restrooms. So you want to check and see if there's any chance of there being stains in those sinks, or making sure that you're aware of what may or may not be going into the restrooms. Labs is another source that I want to touch on for a minute. A lot of times the QA/QC lab, it's easy to believe that the QA/QC lab will only have the same kind of pollutants that the rest of the facility has, just in smaller amounts. But that's not always the case. I have been to an industry that's a food producer that was having silver violations. That didn't seem to make sense, that a silver violation would be coming from a food producer, but it turned out that the silver was coming from a test that was being run in the QA/QC lab. So you want to make sure that you're aware of what's happening in those labs. There could be other sources that aren't listed on this sheet, on this slide, so you want to make sure that you ask the industry if there are any other sources that you've not asked about or that they've not mentioned that might be discharging wastewater, and you can ask that question several times. Sometimes they've just forgotten it's something that's off, tucked away in the corner. And then as you're going around yourself, make sure you watch for that. Is there water anywhere else that they've not discussed with you, and ask about it? So we've talked a little bit about the slug control plan, and once you've made that determination, that evaluation of whether or not the industry needs to have a slug discharge control plan, you need to document that. If you determine that they need to have one, then you need to keep a copy of it, and you also need to put in their permit that they are required to have a slug discharge control plan. Next slide. In addition, when you're doing a walkthrough, in addition to looking at the process area for any changes and at the pretreatment equipment for any changes, you want to look at some of the following, or the list of topics that are on this walkthrough slide. Ideally, you could ask to have the tour go from the beginning where the raw material comes in all the way through the production. It kind of helps understand the process better, but in large facilities, sometimes that can be impossible, or sometimes it's just not practical based on the time frame that you have or the way that the facility is set up. But especially the first time you've been in there, going through beginning to end will help make it make sense. So when you're looking at housekeeping issues, are there stains? Is there leaking equipment? When you're looking at process and storage tanks, are things labeled and coded? Can people tell what's in a barrel? Is there containment? Do they have dikes? Do they have secondary containment? Are there dilution sources? Do they have running water going from a sink, a hose going from a sink over to their process area? Sometimes they might just be refilling a tank that they've drained, but sometimes they might be diluting their process wastewater before it goes to you. So keep an eye out for that. Piping configuration. Do they seem to be leaking? Is it traceable to see where those pipes are going? And in some cases, if they have in old buildings where they've added on, pipes can be going every which direction, and they can be leaving the building going in different directions. So if you're only taking a sample in one location, you might not be capturing the entire representative sample for that industry. You might need to take samples at more than one location. If you notice opportunities for pollution prevention, such as ways they can recycle or reuse chemicals, it's great to point that out. If when you're looking at monitoring point accessibility, is it representative? Again, is it representative of the entire process? Is it accessible to you? Do they have it locked and you don't have a key? You want to make sure that you're able to get in there and use that monitoring point. And the condition of the monitoring point is the tubing coming from going to your sampler. Is it clean? And the industries need to maintain those places and make sure that everything is usable and that they get a representative sample. Now, walkthroughs can be performed prior to asking questions. You just need to use your best professional judgment to decide if it might be more enlightening to perform that walkthrough first. So you can do it in any order. You can do it in different orders each time you go. It doesn't matter. Just, again, use your best professional judgment. The inspector's field notes, information that should be contained in the inspector's notebook or in your notes, you need to make sure that you're documenting things really well. Any information you get from the industry representative, you really want to make sure that you can confirm that with your own observations as much as possible while you're there. Also on this slide, we mentioned photographs. Photographs can be very instrumental in getting a point across, especially if you're having to justify an enforcement action to a mayor or board members or possibly even a judge and a jury. Photos can help you explain an issue to non-technical people in a way that is difficult to explain in words. So when you're talking about poor housekeeping or that there was evidence of solids having spilled, again, here we have a picture that shows stains, poor housekeeping, there are solids issues. And when you're talking to, again, a non-technical person, possibly your mayor, and you're talking about housekeeping issues, they might not understand why that matters to you. And something like this can help you make that case. The pictures are good not only for evidence, but also for helping to explain. You can also see a little bit of foam here in this picture. If you're talking about foam that has spilled or foam that has gotten to the wastewater treatment plant, issues with that, different people might have a different idea of what that means. And so this picture shows you one example of foam. This other picture shows you another example of foam. So, again, not only is it evidence, you need to take the picture just for evidence, you also need to take the picture to help make sure that everybody's on the same page when you're discussing an issue. We talked about looking at containment for chemicals when you are doing your inspection. And in this picture, you can see they've got secondary containment. It looks pretty good at first, but if you notice on the far right, there is one of the containers is on some wooden pallets that are hanging off of the secondary containment. So if that were to rupture or if a forklift were to hit it, it wouldn't necessarily go into that secondary containment. So when you're doing your inspections, you want to look for stuff like this. Not only do they have the secondary containment, but are they using it properly? Is everything where it needs to be so that that secondary containment or that dike can actually be used the way it's supposed to be used? Now, in this picture, I really like it when industries label their piping. I think that's always helpful and it's always a good sign. But when you're tracing, where those pipes are going, you've got to be careful not to rely 100% on their signs. They might have made a mistake, so you just want to make sure that you can trace it without relying on those signs. Also, in this picture, there's a manhole and there's a drain, and I just want to point out that when you're doing the inspections, ask where do they lead, and can you trace that? Are they sealed? Can you confirm that they're sealed? Is there a chance that something might spill? And if it does, where's it going to go once it goes into that drain? Or is there evidence that a spill has happened? An example of that would be this right here. There's evidence that there has been a spill. There's stained concrete there going to the drain. And again, evidence of the spill, so you've got to take pictures for that evidence part. But also, once you've taken that picture, ask them what happened, and then ask them what they're doing to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Another example of spills, of bad housekeeping, again, after you've taken that picture, ask them what happened, what got spilled, where did it go, but make sure you also ask them what they're doing to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. And if they don't have a really good answer for what they're doing to ensure that it's not going to happen again, then talk to your supervisor or have that be part of your write-up. They need to deal with that issue. Now, with the next three pictures, I want you to look at how the discharge is changing over time. These pictures were taken at a facility when the first picture, I think, was taken as they were setting up the sampler, but then the other pictures were taken as an inspection team was trying to gain entry into the facility. And so it is dramatically changing. The discharge is dramatically changing as those inspectors were gaining entry into that facility. And that's a wonderful way to show it, number one, with a picture, but number two, with the sample being taken at the same time. So sampling at the same time that you're doing inspection sometimes can be very useful, very, very helpful for your case. And that's kind of a plug for the class that's going to happen in a couple of weeks about sampling. So, again, sampling is useful, but also the pictures here tell so much of the story to your non-technical people about what's going on. You need to follow up with the industry before you leave. This is a good opportunity to make comments on housekeeping issues that you've seen or any violations that you might have noticed. If you've missed something or if you misunderstood what they were telling you, then it gives them an opportunity to either correct misinformation that you have or to pull something out to show you, to confirm or to show you how it really is happening. But it also gives them a little bit of a warning. If they're going to get a notice violation or some other type of enforcement, it's helpful for them to know what's coming. It also allows them a chance to ask you questions to make sure that you're both on the same page. And again, as I mentioned before, if you see opportunities for pollution prevention before you leave when you're doing this follow-up conversation, it can give you an opportunity to point those opportunities out to them. Once you're back in the office, you need to review your notes, do any kind of follow-up if you need to look in a reg, if you need to check in with your supervisor, or call the industry back to get more information, do all of that, and draft your final inspection report and send it to the industry. You need to do that really as timely as you possibly can. So in addition to it being timely, there are three major things to consider when you're doing that final report. The accuracy of that report is really important. You've got to be factual. It needs to be based on your observations that are verifiable. I've seen a number of cases where an inspector wrote up an industry as being awful and full of violations and lots and lots of problems, and then when I question why they didn't take additional enforcement, they say, well, it really wasn't that bad. You've got to be consistent. You've got to make sure that what you write in the report to the industry is really and truly what you saw. It needs to be relevant. The information in the report has to be relevant to that compliance status of that facility. Lots of sometimes I think we're tempted to give them additional information, something that might be of interest to them, something the EPA might be doing or working on, or additional training that might be coming along in the future. Some of that's helpful, but if you give them pages and pages of information like that, sometimes they can get overwhelmed and it's just too much information. They kind of shut down and don't read the entire report. Or they might focus on the helpful information that you put in the report and not focus on the compliance issues that you put into the report. So you want to make sure that too much of that irrelevant information isn't in there, so it will allow the industry to focus on the real problem that's at hand. You also want to make sure that personal comments and opinions are not in there. Those are subjective, and they're not fact. Don't want them in your final document. Even if it's good, you don't want to go in there and say, Mr. Jones is the nicest, most wonderful person that I've had to work with. You just, something nice even, you don't want to put something that's subjective into the report. And then comprehensive. You want to make sure that that report has all of the information that they need, all the information that somebody would need to understand exactly what happened during your inspection. So if you have photographs, if you reference other reports, you want to make sure that all of that is spelled out as clearly as possible so that anybody, a state person, an EPA person, a third party that's looking at your inspection can understand what you saw and what happened. So that concludes this part of the presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. So while we're sorting out through some questions, I just want to remind the audience a couple of things. There is a resources document with this webcast with more information. And when you get a chance at the end or close to the end of the webcast, click on that button, and you'll find additional resources regarding inspection forms, slug discharge evaluations, and so forth. So please just click on the resource document to find more information about compliance inspections. Okay, so before we start asking some questions, let's ask the audience a question. Let's see. So this is, once again, for just our POTWs. Are your inspections, let's see, how many people are participating at your POTW, at your location today? So how many people are there with you at your location? Is it just yourself, or is it 2 to 5 people, 6 to 10 people, 10 to 20, or do you have more than 20 at your location? So please answer that poll question now, just for our curiosity, how many people are there with you? Because currently we're showing there are 662 individual locations logged on. So we're just wondering if that number is even larger. Okay, so let's see if we have any questions for Jan or Jennifer. Christine?
Jennifer, it seems like there are some questions about taking pictures. So, in general, is it a good idea to take pictures during an inspection? And what if the facility doesn't allow pictures to be taken? What are your suggestions?
I think taking pictures is absolutely a good idea. Again, it's a good way to document what you've seen. If the facility seems to have a hard time with it, one thing you really want to do is to talk to your attorney and to your supervisors before you get in that position to know what their take is on it, because they're the ones that are going to have to support you in this. But get the industry to explain to you why they don't want pictures taken. Ask them what their rationale is for not taking a picture. If they say it's a corporate policy, then ask to see where in writing it says they don't want that, or maybe engage corporate in a conversation about it. You really need to push the industry to explain fully why they don't want you to be taking pictures. You can also offer to show them the pictures that you've taken, and if they have specific problems with a particular picture, then you can agree to be sensitive. Sometimes it's just that they don't want certain pieces of equipment being photographed because, again, they feel like it's a confidential information issue. So you can work with them on that. would really push the industry to explain why it's an issue, and if you have to go up to corporate, then do that too. But again, talk to your attorney and your supervisor just to make sure that they're going to support you in this.
Okay, great. So sort of as a follow-up to that, some folks are interested in how they should be evaluating confidential business information. So if a facility is claiming some sort of information that's CBI, but that may hinder enforcement, such as, like you just said, during an inspection for taking pictures.
I'm sorry, Christine, can you repeat that one more time?
So how should a facility evaluate CBI? How should you evaluate whether it is confidential business information?
Well, they need to look at their legal authority. Somewhere in their legal authority, they're going to have a statement that says how they're going to treat confidential business information. And in some cases, that's going to say that the industry has to notify the facility or notify the control authority when they give them the information that it is confidential business information. Quite often, people will require that it be stamped confidential when it's given to them. So make sure, number one, that you understand what your legal authority requires of them. And then number two, if it's not clear to the inspector whether or not it really and truly is a trade secret or if it really and truly should be considered confidential information, then I would go to the city attorney or to your supervisor, have them go to the city attorney to get some kind of information on that. You might also want to talk to your state or an EPA representative. But also, they cannot consider effluent data as confidential. Even if they stamp it, it can't be considered. It can't be considered confidential information.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for those answers. Let's see the results from our last poll question. The majority of you are just by yourself, 53.5%, and some of you have 10 to 20 folks at your location, so a crowded group there. All right, so one more poll question for the POTWs only. Are your compliance inspections announced or unannounced? Are they always unannounced or always announced? Usually unannounced, but we'll notify the IU when needed, or usually announced, but we'll conduct unannounced inspections when needed, like such as emergency situations, or if you just want to do a spot inspection to see exactly what they're doing. Okay. Let's see. Christine, while they're answering these questions, you want to see if there's any more questions from our audience?
Yes, Jennifer, there are several questions about sign-in sheets. So let's clarify, should you sign a facility's sign-in sheet prior to conducting a compliance inspection? And what if there is a confidentiality clause, but they need to sign in for a safety personnel count?
If the sign-in sheet is just a sign-in sheet that keeps up with who's entering, when somebody's entering the facility and when they're leaving, and that's all it is, or if it just says that you promise that you will follow their safety procedures, then I don't have a problem with signing those types of sign-in sheets. But our attorneys have told us not to sign any kind of sheet where it basically says that we promise not to divulge any information that we learn while we are there on site. So, because that's the whole point of doing the inspection, to be able to gather information to show whether or not they're in compliance or not. So if they have a problem, they want you to sign something that says you'll keep certain things confidential, then that might not be something that you try to resolve while you're there doing the inspection. You could agree to sign a blank piece of paper to give them a signature, or like I said, we will typically give them a copy of our photo badge so that they have something that shows that we're there and that they have a record of us being there. But if they're really concerned about you divulging confidential information while you're there on site, or what you see while you're there on site, I would say don't try to deal with it when you're right there doing the inspection, but have a meeting with your supervisor present and with the industry representatives present, making sure that you can discuss what could be done to alleviate concern, but not put you in a position where you're promising not to share information that you see while you're there. You have to be able to share. You have to document what you've seen there. So, again, having a meeting outside of that inspection and talking through it and making sure that the industry is aware that you can't sign that, but you might be able to find some middle ground that makes them feel more comfortable.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so I just want to remind the audience for our poll questions and the upcoming survey, there are radio buttons on the slide. So please answer the polls and the survey through the slide and not through the question box. Okay, so next is a survey, a quick survey before we continue on with our question and answer about this webcast. What do you think of the survey? Would you recommend this to fellow coworkers and colleagues? So please take a moment and fill out the survey. The information in here is important to us, so please fill it out, and then we'll continue with questions from Christine. Christine?
Okay, here's a question for Jan. What kind of industrial user is a truck washing facility, and what if it discharges more than 100 gallons per day? Okay, truck washing facility that discharges more than 100 gallons per day. Although certainly in this webcast we aren't going to go into categorizations of users, because some of that will depend on your facility and those pollutants at that industry. I'd like to remind you there is a definition of significant industrial user that can be found at 40 CFR 403.3V, V as in Virginia. And the definition of significant industrial user, and if any of your users fall under this definition, is important to know because there are certain requirements that the federal regulations impose on significant industrial users that aren't imposed on other categories of industrial users. The first is whether or not the facility is subject to categorical pretreatment standards. Now, probably one of the things that prompted your question about truck washing is that there is a category that is called transportation equipment cleaning that can be found at 40 CFR 442. That set of regulations does have an applicability section and definitions that would let you evaluate what that particular facility that you are dealing with has at its facility and if it qualifies under that category. For example, I do know that in 40 CFR 442, Transportation Equipment Cleaning, one of the things that is specified is that if this is a facility that just washes the outside of a truck or the outside of a car, knowing that this right now we're in winter and people have a lot of salty cars and they might want to wash them off so the car doesn't rust. If only the outside of a car is being washed and not the inside, like the inside of a tanker truck used to transport something like petroleum or other stuff, if it's only the outside, that does not qualify for 40 CFR 442. But I direct you to read that section of those regulations to see if your facility falls under that category. Now, the next couple clauses under the definition of significant industrial user is for you to find out if that industry discharges an average of 25,000 gallons per day or more of processed wastewater to the publicly owned treatment works, excluding sanitary, some non-contact chlorine water, and boiler blowdown wastewater. 25,000 gallons per day or more would qualify an industry as a significant industrial user. Another clause is if that industry contributes a process waste stream that makes up 5% or more of the POTW's average dry weather hydraulic or organic capacity of the POTW treatment plant. And last but not least, you might have an industry that is discharging pollutants that you know or have experienced has caused problems at your POTW.
And in order to prevent such problems at your POTW, you can call a facility that discharges less than 25,000 gallons, less than 5% or more, but is giving you significant pollutants that you know either can cause or have historically caused a problem at your POTW. You can also call that type of facility a significant industrial user.
Thank you, Phil.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I urge you to review the definitions every time you are looking at an industry.
Great. Thank you, Jan. Just a quick follow-up, really quick. Just wanted to heads up for everyone. I just want to let you know that we have set an attendance record for Pretreatment 101 webcast. According to our records, we have 1,983 attendees for this webcast, which is fantastic, and 44 states participating. So way to go, participants. Yahoo, right? Okay, Christine, I know we're getting tons of questions, so we will try to answer as many questions as possible. But if we don't get to your question, we'll try to do a Q&A fact sheet later. Thank you. Christine?
This question is for Jennifer. If an IU's normal business hours or operating hours are not during the regular workday, say 8 to 5, what should I do for the inspection of that facility?
You've got to inspect the industry when they're in production. And if they have different things going on at different times of the day, then I really urge you to do those inspections. Do an inspection during each shift. It doesn't have to happen all within the same week. You can do it several months apart, but make sure that when you do those inspections that you are actually covering what's happening, what's representative of what that industry is doing. And as I said before, if they're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and lots of times the cleanup happens third shift, it's happening in the middle of the night, or it's happening on the weekend, and the cleanup can be the part of their process that's going to cause you the most problems. It can have the most pollutants. You want to make sure that you're actually there to see what they do and to have an idea of what's happening. So go when they're open.
Great. I think we have another question for Jan Pickrell.
Okay, Jan, so what would be a significant variable flow that would change the qualification of a middle-tier CIU? This goes back to the classification of MTCIU that we were talking about before.
Okay, so what would be basically what would define a significant change in flow, a significant variability of wastewater flow characteristics? I'll say in one generality, a rule of thumb that many folks use is a 20% variation. Something you need to look at with this, though, is that although you could say 20% variation, many times industries discharge batch flows. And sometimes those batch flows, you obviously know, you might have a zero flow one day and 3,000 gallons the next day. That's pretty variable. Obviously, 3,000 is more than 20% above zero. Sometimes you have industries that with those batch flows, and even if the treatment process is continually discharging, they might be doing specialized processes on certain days. And if they are a facility that does not do a consistent one type of industry processing, but might week by week change the types of activities that they're doing, for example, a pharmaceutical facility might develop one drug for packaging one week and another the next week. Certainly at that point, you have a change of flow that would be quite significant if it's week by week, because you would need to reclassify and recharacterize that flow every time that process changed. There's not a set definition, and I urge you to do an inspection and see what more information you can find out. Certainly when we're trying to do inspections and characterizations, the whole idea is you want to know what is representative of the industry on a day-to-day basis. You don't want to have to predict it, because the more variability there is, the more tweaking you might have to do at the publicly owned treatment works to ensure that your plant is in compliance. The whole idea is to try and, as much as you can, find out what is the steady state and to keep your plant at a steady state to ensure that your plant is in good operating order.
Thanks, Jan, for that very exhaustive answer. The next question is for Jenny. Is it okay to conduct inspections at the same facility on consecutive days?
I wouldn't necessarily, if you go to an industry one day, I wouldn't go back the second day and pretend like you hadn't been there the first day and do the entire thing over from beginning to end. But I think it's definitely a very useful thing to go back a second day and say, once I got back to the office, I had some other thoughts, or we had some questions come up, and so I need to come back and follow up. And you can ask to go back into the process area and to look at areas that you had seen the day before and just tell them, I need to see this again, I need to double check something, or I need you to clarify for me. You can ask a lot of the same questions on the second day, but if you are suspicious on the first day that they're holding something back or that they're not really doing what they normally do, come back the second day and talk to them some more. Just double check. That's perfectly fine, in my opinion.
Okay, great, thanks. Now let's talk a little bit about how to document your findings. During an inspection, what is the best way to document your findings? Does it need to be in a bound legal book, like a composition book or a log? Or what about entering the data into a database back at the office? So which documentation procedure would you recommend for things that would hold up in court?
Jennifer?
Okay, I'm sorry. As long as you're documenting it in a way that it's accessible, I think you're going to be okay. Again, you probably want to talk to your city attorney because they're the person that has to defend you. So you want to make sure that they feel comfortable with what you're doing, since every city attorney seems to have a different idea about what they're willing to support and what they're not willing to support. But in addition to that, if you have a filled notebook or if you're doing it on a computer, just so long as you back up what's on the computer so that it's something you can retrieve, however you do it, you've just got to make sure that it's complete, that what you see, everything that's happening is being written down somewhere, and then it's archived in such a way that if somebody needs to see it, you can pull it up and they can see it. Again, as far as what's going to hold up in court, there again, you've got to talk to an attorney on that one to make sure they're comfortable.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so before we continue with the question and answer session, I just want to let everyone know the results of our last poll question. Now, our last poll question was, what is your usual compliance inspection procedure? Do you announce or unannounce? And so 63.7% actually say that they usually announce these inspections, but they will conduct unannounced inspections when needed. So great, and looks like we have about 15 more minutes for some questions, and we do have a lot of questions coming in. So as I mentioned before, if we don't get your questions queued up for this webcast, we will likely develop a fact sheet with all of these questions, so look for that on the EPA website. And also a reminder, there is a resources button on your console. In the resources, there are some guidance manuals for your further review and the speaker's contact information. So if you want to contact them after the webcast, please feel free to do so. So let's see, Christine, do we have any more questions for either of our speakers today?
Oh, we do. Let's see. Should you provide a copy of the inspection report to the industrial user even if there were no substantial findings? And if you decide to do so, when should you do it? Should you do it at the time of the inspection or send it in later?
I would say, first of all, you absolutely need to send them something in writing, and usually that's going to be a letter. Some cities do send a copy of the report. Some cities don't. One of the benefits of sending a copy of the report is if you misunderstood something that they said, or if you've got some information incorrectly documented in that report, then that gives the industry a chance to correct it. So there's a benefit there. Some cities, though, just would prefer not to send a copy. So really it's up to the city. I would say, though, if you're going to send it with a letter. I wouldn't give it to them while you're there at the inspection.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let's just clarify something. Should you wait till after a new industry begins operation in your town to do an initial inspection?
So who wants to take this question? Jennifer or Jan?
Okay, I'll first start off. This is Jan. A industry, as it begins to discharge, needs to already be in compliance with your prohibited discharge standards, your local limits, any categorical standards if this is a new facility. And you, as a POTW pretreatment program, need to ensure that you know what your obligations are of any industrial user on the day that it hooks up to ensure that there are no discharges that industry might give, no pollutants that industry might discharge that could cause harm to your treatment works or collection system. So how long should you wait? You should be out there when they're designing and before they have even started discharging. You need to get out there when they first submit their information saying, hello, I am new to your town and I am building my building and want to put in this process, because you need to collect information before any discharge occurs. Jennifer, do you have anything more to add?
I would agree. I'm a big proponent of people inspecting early and inspecting often. I think the more often you're out there, the better chance the industry has of knowing who you are. And then if something happens and they've got a relationship with you and they know who you are, they might think, ooh, I need to contact the city and let them know about this. So really, you want to be out there as much as you can. And if it's a new industry, in order to write their permit, you need to be out there seeing what's going on so that you can even have an idea of what to put into their permit. And again, to start developing those relationships.
Okay, great. So this is for either of you again. What should you do if you've heard that a facility is moving to your town from an adjacent city? Should you request an inspection of the existing facility before it is moved into your town?
Dan, I can start with this one and let you finish up. I think that's a great idea. I am, again, a big proponent of cities talking to each other. If you know that one of your problem children is closing up and moving to another city, it's wonderful to call that other city and let them know that a potential problem is coming. So it's definitely, I think if you know that an industry is moving to you or potentially moving to you, contact the other city and ask them if they don't mind you tagging along on an inspection. You just have to remember that you are not the control authority in that other city. So you are just tagging along if the other city is willing to let you do it. But I think sharing information among cities is a wonderful idea.
Okay, to add to that, certainly if that industry owner, industry manager says they are opening a facility in your town and they have submitted their plans and specifications and process description and say it's actually extremely like facility in this other town, it would certainly, I would think, help your understanding of what that facility might discharge to you to go and see it. Again, as Jennifer said, the information sharing and ensuring that you have a good handle of that industry's potential discharges to you, as well as working with that always constant relationship building, are good things to start at the get-go.
Great. Thank you, ladies. So let's talk about slug discharge control plans, and maybe Jan could start. Who determines if a slug discharge control plan is needed, and how do you make that determination at the discharger?
Jan?
Okay. Actually, and here's a citation of the regulation to write down, 40 CFR 4038F2, and then the little Roman numeral 6, which is the VI. Basically, remember, 438F2 is the procedures that a POTW must develop and implement to ensure compliance of its program with the federal requirements. That specific citation I gave you of little paragraph 6 says that the POTW is responsible for assessing if that significant industrial user needs a plan to control slug discharges. We have a guidance manual that is on your resource list. As Yixing has discussed before, please visit the resource list that outlines things that you might look at the industry to determine if a slug discharge control plan is needed. Once you do determine that one is needed, please also note that the permit or control mechanism that you issue to that industrial user requiring that slug control plan and to implement the sludge control plan is required to be in the permit, and that is under 4038F1.
Great. Jennifer, did you have anything to add?
Yes, actually, I was going to say one of the things that I have seen in some of my cities is that they tend to lean on the industries a lot to help them determine or let the industry tell them whether or not they need to develop a slug control plan or if they have one. And really, I want to encourage all of the cities to recognize the fact that the control authority, have to make that determination, and they have to be able to justify it. So if you're basing your reasoning on the fact that the industry told you they didn't need one, that's not a good enough justification. You, the city, need to be able to say, yes, they have reasonable potential to slug us, or no, they don't, and this is why I think this. So, yes, it's the control authority's responsibility to do this.
Great, thank you. So we have time, looks like, for maybe one more question. And just FYI, I just got an update on how many countries are actually participating, and we have 3, believe it or not. So we're going global, so that's exciting. So Christine, do we have one more question before we wrap up this webcast?
Here is an easy procedures question. Is it a good idea to send the industrial user a list of items that you'll want to see during the inspection, such as the paperwork that you'll want to cover and what areas you want to visit?
So who would like to take that, Jennifer or Jan? Jan?
I can start. This is Jennifer. You can do that. Again, that could be one of your announced visits, but I do encourage cities, even if you do announced visits, that you occasionally do an unannounced visit. And in that case, you would not tell them in advance what all you want to see. So I don't see a problem with letting them know in advance of certain inspections what you want to look at, but I do really encourage people to do unannounced visits also.
Jan, do you have anything to add?
One thing to be cautious of is I have heard of some folks that will hand the industry or send to the industry prior to the inspection form, and they have the industry fill it out for them. Not only do you get into into that whole question of, well, did you do the inspection, you the POTW inspector, or did the industry do its own self-inspection? Perfectly, I want to support that industries know at their corporate level and their management level what they are doing at their facility to ensure that they are running a good facility. But there are some legal things as far as industries reporting their own problems. Sometimes you will very much run into facilities that will assert as well as work through your legal system to actually obtain less stringent enforcement actions against them because they reported it first. And so you want to make sure you chat with your own attorney as well as your state and EPA office to ensure that you don't run into a situation that brings some of your own inspection activities into question.
Great. Thank you so much, speakers, for answering all those questions. We are running short on time today, and we will, like I said, create a fact sheet of all the remaining questions that were not answered during this webcast. A quick reminder about that resource button again. If you click on that button, you will find a PDF file with some additional documents that you can refer to. Some of those documents will discuss compliance inspection procedures. So review those documents, and if your question is not answered after reviewing those documents, please contact our speakers. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to conclude today's webcast. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Thank you to our two speakers. And, of course, thank you to everyone who's joined us today. For each of the Pretreatment 101 series webcasts, certificates will be available for each participant. A link to the certificate will appear on your screen. Please copy and paste it. Don't try to hyperlink it. Copy and paste it into an Internet Explorer or whatever you're using for Internet, and you will be able to type the name of each attendee and print those certificates from your computers. So once again, thank you for joining us. This ends our Pretreatment 101 POTW Procedures for Conducting Compliance Inspections webcast. Don't forget to register for our next webcast, which will be POTW Procedures for Conducting Compliance Monitoring, which will be held on Tuesday, January 25th. Thank you, everyone.